It is October 5th, 1966, at the Enrico Fermi Unit 1 nuclear facility. A catastrophic meltdown now threatens 4 million lives across the city of Detroit. Yet a tiny metal plate has already paralyzed the billion-dollar machine. Inside the control room, the needle on the neutron monitor begins a frantic, jagged dance. Engineers continue pushing the reactor toward full power while the core silently begins to liquefy. Inside the control room at Frenchtown Township, Michigan, the silence of routine is shattered by the... It is 3:05 p.m. For decades, the Atomic Energy Commission promised that this facility would be the future of American energy, a self-sustaining fountain of power located just 30 miles outside the heart of Detroit. But as the engineers stare at the erratic temperature readings in fuel subassemblies 4 and 5, the promise of the atomic age evaporates into a singular cold realization. They are losing control of the core. The liquid sodium coolant, essential for keeping the reactor's temperatures soar past critical thresholds, and the very uranium that was meant to light the city is now turning into a molten radioactive sludge. Outside the thick concrete walls, the millions of residents in the Detroit-Toledo corridor continue their day, oblivious to the fact that their safety is currently being guarded by a handful of men fighting a losing battle against physics. This was not supposed to happen. Every safety protocol, every redundancy, and every official assurance had insisted that a meltdown at Fermi 1 was a mathematical impossibility. Yet, as the manual scram order is barked across the floor at 3:20 p.m., the heavy control rods descend into a reactor that has already begun to tear itself apart from the inside out. To understand how Detroit came to the brink of erasure, one must look back to the mid-1950s, a period defined by a boundless, almost religious faith in the power of the atom. In this era of progress, Walker Sisler, the visionary chairman of Detroit Edison, stood as the primary architect of a project that promised to change history. While most of the world was experimenting with standard light water reactors, Sisler set his sights on the holy grail of nuclear physics, the fast breeder reactor. This was Enrico Fermi Unit 1. Unlike conventional plants, the breeder reactor was designed to create more plutonium fuel than the uranium it consumed, effectively creating a perpetual motion machine of energy production. It was a high-stakes gamble built on the shores of Lake Erie in Frenchtown Township, Michigan. But the technical challenges were immense. To achieve its theoretical potential, the reactor required liquid sodium, a volatile metal that burns with a white-hot intensity if it even touches oxygen or water, as its primary coolant. As the massive steel dome began to rise 30 miles south of Detroit, voices of dissent began to pierce the optimism. Walter Reuther, the influential president of the United Auto Workers, looked at the blueprints and saw not a marvel of engineering, but a catastrophic risk to his union members and their families. Reuther launched a groundbreaking legal campaign to halt construction, arguing that an experimental reactor of such complexity should never be situated so close to major population centers like Detroit and Toledo. Even within the Atomic Energy Commission, the very body tasked with promoting the project, internal safety committees voiced grave concerns. They noted that the behavior of a breeder core during a meltdown was dangerously unpredictable. Yet, the AEC was a house divided, serving as both the industry's cheerleader and its referee. In their rush to prove American technical superiority, they ignored their own internal warnings and pushed the project forward. Behind the scenes, engineers were already struggling with the reactor's temperamental nature, battling leaks and mechanical failures that cost millions. But there was one detail that didn't make sense, and no one noticed it yet. Despite the mounting technical red flags, the project proceeded as if failure were an impossibility. setting the stage for a day in October when the theoretical, in the shadow of the legal battles and the AEC's conflicting mandates, workers continued the installation of thousands of components, unaware that a small undocumented modification during construction had placed a literal piece of scrap metal in the heart of the machine. The stage was now set for the zirconium ghost to emerge. At 3 p.m. on October 5, 1966, the control room at Fermi 1 was a theater of clinical focus. Engineers began the methodical process of ramping the reactor's power up to 67 megawatts, unaware that a mechanical failure was already in progress deep beneath the surface of the liquid sodium. A small triangular piece of zirconium plate, measuring just 4 by 8 inches, had broken away from a flow-deflecting structure at the bottom of the reactor vessel. It drifted upward through the coolant like a jagged ghost, caught in the flow until it wedged itself firmly against the cooling whirlpools of two fuel assemblies. By 3:05 p.m., the routine operation transformed into a crisis. Technicians watched in disbelief as temperature sensors for the core spiked and erratic neutron readings began to fluctuate across the consoles. Then, the high radiation alarm sounded, a piercing wail that signaled the containment building had to be sealed immediately. The fuel was melting. At 3:20 p.m., the reactor was manually scrammed, successfully halting the chain reaction, but the true terror had only just begun. Everything they believed up to this point was wrong. The engineers were now operating in total darkness, terrified that the melted fuel might slump into a geometry that would trigger a spontaneous recriticality, a secondary power surge that could breach the heavy containment and release a lethal. For 2 years, the reactor remained a hot and untouchable mystery, while the city of Detroit. It was not until 1968 that a custom-designed periscope was lowered into the radioactive depths to finally identify the zirconium plate. This discovery launched a grueling 4-year struggle to safely. The facility, which was built to usher in a new era of limitless energy, instead became a tomb of failed ambition. While the public remained largely oblivious to the scale of the risk, the men inside the wire fought a silent war against physics to prevent a secondary disaster that could have redefined the geography of the American Midwest forever. 36 years after the Fermi 1 incident, a new nightmare materialized in Oak Harbor, Ohio. In March 2002, during a routine refueling outage at the Davis-Besse nuclear power station near Toledo, inspectors climbed atop the reactor pressure vessel to address what they thought was a minor nozzle repair. Instead, they found a literal hole in the head of the machine. Boric acid, leaking from the reactor's primary cooling system, had spent years silently eating through 6¼ inches of solid carbon steel. What remained was a terrifyingly thin layer of stainless steel cladding, only 3/8 of an inch thick. This fragile membrane, which was already bulging under the immense heat and weight, was all that stood between the region and a high-pressure breach that would have drained the reactor's life. But what investigators discovered next changed everything. They realized the plant's filters had been clogging with red iron oxide rust for years, a glaring warning sign that management had systematically ignored in favor of uninterrupted power production. This culture of complacency nearly erased a localized region from the map, yet history was doomed to repeat itself with a different kind of failure in the Quad Cities area. On March 28, 2023, at the Quad Cities nuclear power station in Cordova, Illinois, human error replaced mechanical decay. During a complex drain-down operation, a staggering 177 valves were left open, creating an unintended path for the reactor's vital coolant to escape. In a frantic 6-minute span, 1,200 gallons of radioactive water vanished into the plant's drainage systems. Forensic calculations performed by experts at the Union of Concerned Scientists revealed that the reactor was a mere 15 minutes away from the fuel becoming uncovered and beginning to melt. Perhaps more chilling than for 10 days, senior operators willfully falsified records to hide the misconduct from federal regulators. It wasn't until August 2025 that the NRC officially labeled the incident a willful cover-up under Confirmatory Order EA-24-035, exposing a profound rot in the facility's safety culture. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. The shadow of Fermi 1 now stretches into the legislative halls of modern Washington, where the balance between innovation and oversight. With the passage of the Advance Act of 2024, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has begun to shift its focus toward administrative efficiency, a move that has sparked intense debate among the nation's top energy safety experts. In May 2025, the Union of Concerned Scientists issued a stark warning, suggesting that these changes could inadvertently create the same types of regulatory blind spots that allowed the 6-inch corrosion hole at Davis-Besse to go undetected for a full decade. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. The industry is currently racing against a series of critical federally mandated deadlines that will determine the safety profile of the By December 31st, 2025, Constellation Energy must complete its fleet-wide safety updates, a direct consequence of the 2023 Quad Cities incident, where a culture of internal silence and record falsification near the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's August 2025 confirmatory order highlights a chilling evolution in modern nuclear risk. The greatest threat to a major metropolitan area is no longer just a loose piece of zirconium metal, but a willful breakdown. Even as the Davis-Besse plant faces its own March 2026 deadline to implement its Cycle 24 operating requirements under the current safety amendment for alternate neutron instrumentation, the global community looks toward there. As of April 2026, a dangerously low staff of only 22 licensed operators remains, serving as a haunting reminder of how fragile these city-destroying technologies can be. As we approach the May 27, 2026, deadline for public comments on the NRC's proposed fusion regulatory framework, critics argue these new frameworks may weaken oversight just as we enter a new era of nuclear expansion. The zirconium plate at Fermi 1 was a physical obstruction that nearly cost Michigan its future, but the true barriers to safety are more often found in the administrative complacency of the present. We must decide if the pursuit of more efficient energy can ever be allowed to outpace our absolute commitment to the human lives. We owe it to the victims and those who survived the near misses of our subscribe so these stories are never forgotten. Share this to spread awareness.